So yes, recording is on, huh?
Sure,
Now,
sure.
you can check Facebook Live. Yeah.
Sure.
আমি কিন্তু 7:15 বার হয়ে যাবে একটু।
Sir.
ওই ভয়েস অফ আমেরিকার কি ইলেকশন আর বলো না।
আচ্ছা,
এগুলো আনএন্ডিং শেষ হচ্ছে না।
রাইট।
আবার পোস্ট ইলেকশন ইভালুয়েশন থাকবে।
পোস্ট ইলেকশন, তারপরে কি বলে ফ্রান্সের এই যে ঘটনা
থিংস আর আনফোল্ডিং ডে বাই ডে।
বিরক্ত মানুষ।
হ্যালো আশরাফ, কেমন আছেন?
স্যার, গুড টু সি ইউ।
কেমন আছেন আশরাফ? ভালো আছেন?
স্যার ভালো আছি স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ।
আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
আসসালাম।
ম্যাডাম। মুবাশশিরা।
ভালো।
জি ভালো, আপনি কেমন আছেন? আসসালামু আলাইকুম লালিফা, কেমন আছো?
হ্যাঁ মুবাশশিরা, তুমি কেমন আছো? অনেকদিন পরে দেখলাম।
হ্যাঁ সেটাই। তুমি ভালো আছো?
You are page একটু চেক করতে হবে।
আমি দেখছি।
It's live.
It's live.
ম্যাডাম, এটা খুব ভালো লাগে যে আমাদের ব্যাচের মানে অনেকে অনেক খুব ভালো জায়গায় এখন আছে। মুবাশশিরা তাদের মধ্যে একজন।
কোথায় আছেন মুবাশশিরা আপনি?
জি, আসসালামু আলাইকুম স্যার, আমি মিনিস্টার অফ ফরেন অ্যাফেয়ার্স।
ও ওয়ান্ডারফুল, রাইট। আমি শুনেছিলাম, আমি আসলে রিকল করতে পারছিলাম না। ও ভেরি গুড। সো উই আর ভেরি প্রাউড।
আসসালামু আলাইকুম স্যার।
আসসালামু আলাইকুম। আমরা কিন্তু লাইভে আছি এখন।
মিলা ভাই, আপনি ডিওয়ার ফ্যামিলিতে পোস্ট করতে পারবেন? জাস্ট দ্য লিংক।
আমি ওখানে দিয়েছি কিন্তু।
দিয়েছেন না? আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে।
হ্যাঁ, একটু জাস্ট অ্যাপ্রুভ করতে হবে আর কি, অ্যাজ দ্যাট। জি, দিয়ে দিয়েছি।
আসসালামু আলাইকুম। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
আমরা কি স্টার্ট করছি নিলয়?
লাইভ তো শুরু করে দাও।
লাইভে দেখা যাচ্ছে ডিউআর পেজ?
হ্যাঁ লাইভ মানে
না, এখনো আসেনি। আপনি একটু আপনার টাইমলাইনও পোস্ট করেন, তাহলে আমি শেয়ার করছি। হ্যাঁ, 1 মিনিট দিলে আমরা।
আতিক নাহিয়ানদেরকে একটু ট্যাপ করো না।
জি।
Niloy, should we start?
মানে
ম্যাডাম, it's live ম্যাডাম, শুরু করতে পারেন।
Thank you. Welcome. I welcome you to the second episode of our webinar series, IR Discourses. And as we go launch into the second episode, let me very briefly talk a little bit about the objective, that why the Department of International Relations plan to have this kind of a discourse or a series. Our objective mainly was to, or is to, bring IR back home and to deliberate upon and talk about and debate on the different discourses that of IR that the students of international relations have been studying, and we are discoursing you know, in our classrooms, as well as in TV talk shows, in our newspapers. And the objective is mainly to see that how, you know, we can create a discourse of our own, and to deliberate upon issues, and to see that if the different discourses, how do they compare, or how do they match, or how do we see them in our everyday lives, or in the way of Bangladesh foreign policy or Bangladesh diplomacy, or how we, you know, in Bangladesh look at international politics. That being the major objective, the General Committee uh, uh, is the organizing committee for this series. And I, along with my colleagues, Dr. Ashraf. Ashraf, are you there?
Yes, madam.
Dr. Ashraf, Dr. Niloy Ranjan Vishwash, and Muhammad Atiq. We welcome you to this second episode, as I said earlier. Welcome to all of you. And let me also say that this is being live streamed on the Facebook, and our students are there. So even if you don't see many participants over here on the Zoom, I'm sure our students are there in the Facebook. Today, you know, like we are going to deliberate upon the international institutions. This is the second of a series, as I said earlier. And as the UN, I mean, today is the 31st of October, and we know this is the month when UN was born. And as the UN steps into its 75 years, I think it is time for us to take a fresh look at the UN. That how it has fared, not only over its last 75 years, how it has fared through the Cold War politics, post-Cold War period, against the Second Cold War, and through the different genocides, violences, mass violence, human rights, all, you know, different kind of discourses, how it has evolved itself, how it has tried to expand itself. These are the different issues that we would be deliberating upon. And most importantly, you know, like when UN was created, it was mandated to preserve or maintain international peace and security in the world. So has it been able to do that or not do that? That is also one of our major area of concern today. And I would like to point out over here that the pandemic also is an important entry point for us, that how, you know, like UN has fared through the pandemics as a global body, how it has fared through it. Has it been able to provide any global leadership, or has it been limited by what we call the sovereignty of the state, or the Security Council, or the major power contestations? Where does liberalism stand today vis-a-vis realism? In the 70s, we saw a thrust towards the international regime, or the what we later on started to call global governance. These were the different issues, you know, like whether it has been able to set up any standards, norms. I, I would tend to argue that in the human security realm, UN has fared better than the traditional security arena. And in the human security arena, with the SDGs, MDGs, perhaps it has served the interest, or it has fared better because it has been able to give voice to the, not only to the voiceless, I would say, to many sections of the community, you know, like we had the era of UN Decade of Women, then UN protocols on or treaties on climate change, development programs. You know, these are the different areas where I would argue that UN has done much better than traditional security or state security. And if one looks into the history of UN, one would also find that Mr. Shahidul Haq is here with us today. I'm sure he will be able to tell us more on this. But on debates on human security, human rights, a study shows that before the creation, or when there were deliberations going on the Human Rights Council and the ICC, there were 600 statements in favor of human rights. And according to that particular studies, that there had never been before, such a wide array of statements in favor of a particular if one may call it a discourse, or one may call it a theme, or one may call it a concern area, whatever we call it. But the human rights arena, it occupies an important area or realm where UN has concentrated, perhaps maybe because of the thrust from the global south. That is also an issue to be to be deliberated upon. But in Bangladesh, as we face the pandemic, and also when we are facing the Rohingya crisis, the migrants issue, the vaccine diplomacy, all these things which are, wrapping us around today, I think it is important to have a critical gaze at the UN and to see that the institution which was created 75 years ago with a mandate to preserve and maintain peace and security in the world, how has it fared and where it has failed? And is it because of the veto power that it has turned into instead of maintaining peace and security, it has turned into an instrument for a different kind of hegemony or a different kind of realist politics? These are the different issues I think we will be deliberating upon, and these are our entry points into this program, today's program. We are very lucky, I must say, that we have two very distinguished speakers with us today. Professor Ihsanul Haq from the Department of International Relations, Mr. Shahidul Haq, our immediate past Foreign Secretary, and he's just a fellow at the North-South University. They are our speakers today. I'll now request Professor Ihsanul Haq to open up the discussion. Ihsan, I hope
Yes.
you'll be deliberating upon the conceptual side of
Yes.
UN and the institutional side of it. Ihsan,
Okay,
it's all
sure.
yours.
Thank you very much, madam. Just give me a few seconds so that I can, get my slides. Just a few seconds. Yes. All right. All right. Can you see the slides on the screen?
Yes, sir. You can see it.
Okay, wonderful. Right. Distinguished colleagues and participants, good evening to all of you. This is my great pleasure to have gotten an opportunity to present a paper on an important issue. I express my profound gratitude to Professor Amina Mohsin, who was also my teacher, for kindly inviting me to present this paper. I understand that the time allocated to me is only 30 minutes. So I'm dealing with such a topic which is unmanageably broad, and I'm afraid I might not be able to touch upon all the critical issues relating to the topic within this short span of time. But I'll try my best to cram everything within the 30-minute time limit. Well, as the title of my paper is International Institutions in the Changing World, Bangladesh and Bangladesh's expanding relations with the United Nations. This paper actually has two parts. In the first part of the paper, I'll be basically dealing with the various conceptual considerations in connection with the functioning of international institutions. And then in the second part, I'll very quickly, very briefly try to find the linkage between Bangladesh and United Nations. We know that in the last 46 years, Bangladesh's relationship with the United Nations have flourished a lot. So this is what these are the two issues that I would be, bringing in the presentation. Well, just a minute. Yes. Well, we know that at the beginning of the, with the end of the Cold War, global politics, has undergone a profound change. The global system is evolving rapidly, and the current world order offers an opportunity to rethink about the role of international institutions. It is in this context, that this paper focuses on the enduring academic debates and discourses on the existence and functions of international institutions in general, and the United Nations in particular. The study explores perceptions and misperceptions of ethical issues, problems, and dilemmas arising from an intense debate on the relevance and role of international institutions. The paper also focuses on Bangladesh's multilateral approach to foreign policy, highlighting the UN diplomacy and how this approach helps the country preserve and promote its fundamental interests in today's highly complex and fiercely competitive world. International institutions are central features of international life. The current era is governed by a multitude of international institutions that influence and shape state behavior in virtually all policy fields. Even so, international institutions can diminish or lose their credibility, especially when the major powers apparently disregard the norms, the principles, and rules inherent in these institutions, or pursue their self-serving policies that undermine these international institutions. We see that the great powers, are having ambivalence towards multilateral institutions or international institutions these days. The institutions, the reluctance of dominant and influential states to stay committed to international institutions is a long-standing and recurrent problem in international relations. This has recently been evidenced by the Trump administration's complicated relations with the United Nations, with the specialized agencies of the United Nations like the WHO, and there are other special bodies of the United Nations like UNESCO and UNHRC, United Nations Human Rights Council, and WTO, and also Trump administration recently developed a very difficult relationship with NATO allies. So U.S. relations with international institutions have posed serious challenges to institutional order. There are some authors like G. John Eikenberry and Weibel and Paul who have constantly been writing on that on continuing tensions between the states and international relations, international institutions. Likewise, we know that the British withdrawal from the European Union left potentially important ramifications for Europe's institutional order. Skeptics often, downplay the effectiveness of multilateral approach in foreign policy. Nonetheless, working through international institutions is an invaluable means for resolving conflicts, maintaining peace and security, promoting sustainable economic development, and advocating for human rights. In today's world, international institutions are indispensable for stabilizing regional and global orders. Let me move on to the next slide. Yes, the conceptual considerations. Well, this is a very difficult part. I might not, be able to, cover, all the issues, but I'll be trying to give you some glimpses on the conceptual issues relating to international institutions. International institutions have been defined as persistent and connected sets of rules and practices that prescribe state behavior, constrain state activities, and shape state expectations. There are writers, like Richard and Has, Robert Keohane, who have, focused again and again on these issues. International institutions are there to, recommend what kind of behaviors are expected from the states. Sometimes they put limit on the state behavior. And international institutions play instrumental role in shaping the expectations of the states. So these rules and norms include international law and international norms that help govern world politics. World politics is all the time strongly influenced by international law and international, although we find that some states might sometimes develop some sort of antipathy towards international norms and procedures. International institutions are diverse and sophisticated entities with legal, political, and social dimensions that overlap and conflict. John J. Mearsheimer, who is a well-known realist in the field of international relations, defines international institutions as a set of rules that stipulate the ways in which states should cooperate and compete with each other. So these institutions prescribe acceptable forms of state behavior and prescribe unacceptable kinds of behavior. So you see, in John Mearsheimer's understanding of international institutions, there are two aspects. On the one side, he mentioned about institutions offering suggestions to the states, or institutions different ways of accepting state behavior. On the other hand, he also mentioned about the challenges which are posed by the states to international institutions, and that's why he mentioned about prescribing unacceptable kinds of behavior from state. Technically, there are two main types of international institutions. The first is an intergovernmental organization, or IGO, whose members are states represented by their governments, and IGOs are established by intergovernmental agreement. Examples include United Nations, the World Bank, and regional organizations such as NATO. The second category is an international non-governmental organization, or INGO, whose members are individuals or associations. Amnesty International, BRAC are well-known examples. There are many more examples of NGOs. So there sometimes international institutions and international organizations are used interchangeably, although there are sharp differences between these two phrases. The main focus of this paper is on intergovernmental organizations. The number of international institutions has grown significantly since the end of the Second World War. According to the Brussels-based Yearbook of International Organizations, 2018-19, there are at least 280 intergovernmental organizations in today's world. These institutions vary greatly, in size, scope, goals, and influence. All right. Now, to the next slide. Right. Yes. All right. So the proliferation of international institutions over the years indicates that global politics has now become more institutionalized. Beth A. Samuels and Martin, they mention it, in one of their articles, that international, global politics, has, become, more and more institutionalized in today's world. International institutions, global and regional, function in multiple ways, including security, development, trade, health, environment, education, human rights. It can go on and on. About every imaginable issue that transcends national boundaries. So what do states expect from international institutions? The question is simple, but the answer is very difficult. States expect international institutions to frame laws, which is quite logical, to rebuild fragile and war-torn societies. This is also quite fair, to disburse foreign aid to poor countries, although this issue is highly contestable, to manage security and even help establish new democracies. In this sense, states feel they need capable institutions to address a long list of transnational challenges. I repeat, states want to see capable institutions, well-equipped institutions who would be able to address a long list of transnational challenges, but at the same time, states fear competitors. States have some sort of skepticism about the roles being played by international institutions. They are not willing to lose their sovereignty to international institutions. And here lies the crux of the problem. States create international institutions, for stabilizing global order, but sometimes states get involved in, troubles with international institutions. They feel that international institutions sometimes, challenge the sovereignty of the state. Well, so often the result is very contradictory. On the one hand, states favor the function of international institutions. On the other hand, when international institutions start doing certain things, states, the leaders of the states, start expressing their reservations. There is a writer by the name of Jessica T. Matthews, who is a very well-known American peace activist, and she was also, the head of, Washington-based Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She, wrote a very interesting book, on the, constant, tensions between the states and international institutions. She described, this particular attitude of state as, as a process by which, states sometimes try to hand international organizations sweeping new responsibilities and then rein them in with limited mandates or inadequate funding. So this particular observation made by Jessica T. Matthews is of extreme importance for us. She mentioned that, states hand over responsibilities, to the international institutions, and states try to dictate these institutions. Sometimes states defund international institutions when international institutions, do not do things in line with the wishes of the states. There's another writer, by the name of Mark Pollack, who is also a well-known, American political scientist. He, feels that states delegate a degree of authority and power to international institutions for serving their own interests. So both Jessica T. Matthews and Mark K. Pollack, think, in a similar manner about the attitude of states towards international institutions. In general terms, states confer power on international institutions to allow them to achieve specified objectives. Specified objectives, sometimes international institutions, set their goals and objectives, as per the, recommendations made by the states. So when, there is, less chance, of the outbreak of tensions between the states and international institutions, then international institutions can, in a very secure manner, carry out their activities. States are often attracted to international institutions for their strategic value or as alternative channels to pursue foreign policy objectives. So we see that, states have some, intentions, to dictate or guide international institutions. Now to the next slide. All right. Just a minute. All right. Now there's a fundamental question. Why does the study of international institutions fit into the field of IR? The study of international relations focuses on relations among states. The past 3 decades have witnessed the development of a field called global governance, which concentrates on the way in which global interactions are managed and regulated. Global governance as a field of study looks not only at formal mechanisms of government, but also at governance without government. It seems, quite interesting. Governance without the presence of government, which means patterns of regulation of the global activities that do not flow from specific authoritative source. Patterns of regulation. There is a question of regulation, and this is a very valid question. At the global level, so many activities take place. So these activities need to be closely monitored for, a better future, for a stable order, for a stable global order. So these patterns of regulation of global activities, that do not flow from specific authoritative source. So thus, international institution as a field of study fits somewhere between the fields of international relations and global governance. This is what Barkin has mentioned in one of his research works. There is an overwhelming and widespread consensus that the role of international institutions is crucial for global governance. International institutions can be seen as the agents through which states promote their interests. Many theorists and analysts argue that international institutions provide the most effective ways to states to deal with interdependence and reciprocity. In other words, international institutions are vehicles through which states cooperate to bring the best outcomes for each member in an interdependent world. Other scholars argue that international institutions should not be seen as neutral agents of cooperation, but they represent the interests of selective states and are mechanisms through which powerful states dictate less powerful members. States exercise power in international institutions through the creation of institutional bureaucracies and procedures which can be called institutional power. This is also a very important issue in this discussion. Institutional power, is created by the states, the powerful states who take the responsibility of launching, international institutions. Institutional power refers to the capability of particular states to put their own people into positions of power in international institution bureaucracies, and the ability to those, of those states to influence the structures of those bureaucracies in ways that fulfill their interests. So this can vary from institution to institution. An example can be cited to support the idea that states create institutional power in order to fulfill their ultimate goals. The president of the World Bank, David Malpass, currently he's David Malpass, but by tradition, the president of the World Bank is always an American. There's no exception to this rule. And the managing director of the International Monetary Fund is always a European. So this is also, there is also no exception, to this rule. So the World Bank president should be an all right. So the World Bank president should be an American citizen, and the IMF managing director, should be a European citizen. Currently, see, David Malpass is an American economist, and Christina Georgieva is also an economist. She's from Bulgaria. So we see that this kind of institutional bureaucracy sometimes causes challenges for the member states. Next slide. Yes. The impact of international institutions over long term is undeniable. They have transformed international relations by offering solutions to external disorders and by emphasizing on shared responsibilities. Nonetheless, we should not be inflating the role of international institutions. We should not be overly optimistic about the functions of international institutions. They have their own limits. They do not have either independent means of force or the right to regulate actors with much authority. The exercise of international institutions raises, the existence of international institutions raises few conceptual questions about the nature of international politics and the capacity of international rules to bind or even coexist with the sovereign states. Looking back in the 1980s, there was a scholarly interest among social science researchers to explore the origin, evolution, and the impact of international institutions. And at the time, the discipline of IR began to emphasize on the role of international institutions in mediating power relations, in shaping state behavior and policy outcomes, and in explaining the nature of international political authority. fast forward 4 decades, today, international relations remains heavily influenced by the international institutions. And higher scholarship keeps a close focus on understanding the origin and consequences of international institutions that structure international affairs. All right, the intellectual landscape of international relations has traditionally been characterized by the dichotomous distinction between anarchy and order. While anarchy is understood to be an unstable condition, order is seen to consist of structures of international authority and law. A deep and foundational debate between the realist and institutional schools of IR was about the possibility of international law to limit the rationality of anarchy. In this debate, a pessimistic or realistic view is confronted with a more optimistic view, which is the institutionalist view, and neorealists warned against what they say as the false promise of international institutions, and they argue that international institutions could not live up to the expectations put in them. John J. Mearsheimer wrote a very provocative article for the journal called International Security back in 1994. The title of the article is The False Promise of International Institutions. And in that article, Mearsheimer concentrated on assessing the major IR theories that employ institutions as a core concept, like liberal institutionalism, collective security, and even critical theory. John Mearsheimer maintains that institutions are basically a reflection of the distribution of power in the world, which seems to be quite logical. Institutions are based on the self-interested calculations of the great powers, and they have no independent impact on state behavior. This is what Mearsheimer thought at the time. According to Mearsheimer, if you look at history, we'd find that international institutions failed to prevent deadly conflicts in several regions of the world. Realists, therefore, believe that institutions are not an important cause of peace. Institutions matter only on the margins. According to a preeminent thinker of international relations and also a neo-realist, Kenneth Walsh, international institutions are founded and dominated by the strongest states and are sustained as long as they serve the interests of their strongest members. This was seen in the institutions which were built after the Second World War, and most of which were either created or guided by the United States as a means of reshaping the post-World War II global order. Realist institutionalism argues that institutions are essential channels for states to actualize power or force in their security interests. All right. On the other side of the spectrum, we see that Robert Keohane and Lisa Martin wrote an article for the same Journal of International Security the following year in 1995, and the title of their article was quite interesting: "The Promise of Institutional Theory." Institutionalist theory. The institutionalist scholars, show that how institutions operate independently of power politics. They claim that international institutions make the interactions between states more stable and predictable, and make the international system as a whole less war and crisis prone. In a series of works, Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye articulated an original and powerful defense of institutionalism in international relations. Robert Keohane and Lisa Martin rejected the logic of realism as fallacious. Institutions, they very vociferously argued that institutions can discourage states from calculating self-interest on the basis of how every move influences their relative power positions. Institutions are obviously independent variables, and they have the capacity to move states away from war. So this is very important. Robert Keohane and Lisa Martin, in the article, categorically mention that institutions are not dependent variables, they're independent variables. So there is every chance on the part of the institutions to play a very constructive role in international relations. There are other scholars who consider institutions to be a powerful force for stability. Beth Simmons and David Baldwin, for example, hold a view that continuous pattern of institutionalized cooperation is likely to stop the outbreak of military conflicts. John Ruggie is another scholar, who is strongly, supportive of the functioning of international institutions. He maintains that multilateral norms and institutions have helped stabilize international consequences. The significance of international institutions lies in the fact that often the powerful states decide to act through these institutions when it comes to the use of military force. For example, with the exception of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the American policymakers always sought endorsement of the UN Security Council before resorting to the use of force. So this clearly justifies, the role of institutions in today's world. In the context of this debate, debate, between the realists and the liberal institutionalists, the discipline of IR has long focused its attention on the potentials and pitfalls of international institutions. These institutions deserve attention because they have agency. They have agency setting influence, and potentially they have potentially important socializing influences in international relations. Now, the next part of the discussion, the United Nations as a global institution. United Nations is a non-state actor, and it is the only global institution in today's world. In the last 75 years, Professor Amina Mohsin, during her introductory speech, she mentioned about the role of United Nations in today's world, and she also tried to understand in what areas UN has failed and in what areas UN has succeeded. So we see that in the last 75 years, the United Nations and the universal agencies that form part of the UN system have been central to international relations. There are many criticisms which are leveled against the United Nations, but the fact remains that United Nations, as a global institution, has been able to achieve a lot of successes. Professor Amina Mohsin mentioned that in the socio-economic sector, the successes of the United Nations are more than its success rate in the political security field. The United Nations is a global institutional framework of member states that bring their different aspirations, values, ideologies, and capabilities to the table. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated in 2018 that the United Nations is the cornerstone of the international system and the institutional expression of multilateralism. So in the words of Antonio Guterres, United Nations is playing a critical role, in establishing the logic of multilateralism in today's world. Now, the big question is that is the UN, an instrument of global governance? There are a lot of debates, on global governance, but when this issue is related to the function of the United Nations, there are, some observations are made by scholars. International institutions deal mostly with every imaginable issue area that states are unable to address individually. And these are the issues that the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan famously called problems without passports. All major international institutions have expanded their mandates over the years, and they constantly struggle to balance diverse goals and responsibilities as they are expected to constantly adapt to a changing global global environment. Right. The world has changed considerably since most international institutions were set up after the end of the Second World War. However, the architecture of global governance from that time is either outmoded or inadequate to address today's global and regional challenges. This changing context requires some type of shift in what international institutions are expected to deliver to the states of the world. Governance in general means administering, ruling, exercising authority, and exerting leadership. Governance also has to provide leadership, legitimacy, and coherence. In the academic and policy worlds, there are a number of definitions of global governance. Global governance is understood as the collective management. So I'll just skip this part. Mainly I want to focus on the definition given by Thomas G. Weiss and Ramesh Thakur. You can see on the slide. Thomas G. Weiss is a very powerful author in the field of global governance. He is a professor, presidential professor at the City University of New York. He has worked extensively on global governance. And Ramesh Thakur is another scholar who also contributed a lot to the field of global governance. They offer a broader definition of global governance. Global governance, they stated, is the sum of laws, norms, policies, and institutions that define, constitute, and mediate relations among citizens, society, markets, and the state in the international arena. I'll be moving very fast. I understand we have time constraint. Let me see.
Sure. Sorry, Ihsan, can I request you to wind up in 5 minutes, please?
All right, sure. I'll do that. No problem. Can I get 10 more minutes? You said 5 minutes?
I said 5 minutes. You want 5 minutes?
No problem. No problem. I'll try my best to wrap up. All right. No problem. Just a minute. All right. So this part deals with Bangladesh's multilateral behavior. Well, Bangladesh, very clearly believes in multilateral foreign policy. I'll skip this part as well because of the time constraint. All right. So let me share this with you. Bangladesh's representation in the UN system. Currently, there are 15 specialized agencies of the United Nations, and Bangladesh is member of all the specialized agencies. You can see that most of the Bangladesh received membership of these specialized agencies. Most of these specialized agencies in 1972-73. So a question might arise that how come Bangladesh became a member of special agencies of the United Nations when it failed to become a member of the UN itself. So special agencies are part of the UN system. They operate independently from the UN structure. They have their own leadership. They have their own budget. And they have their own autonomy. So that's why Bangladesh succeeded in becoming member of most of the special agencies by 1973. Engagement, and there are 11 UN funds and programs. These are the names that you can see on the screen. So I'll skip this part. And Bangladesh's membership to other IGOs under the UN system can be seen here. IAEA, WTO, IOM. So right. And Bangladesh is also a member of around 20 intergovernmental organizations. These memberships sufficiently indicate that Bangladesh firmly believes in the the multilateral principle in foreign policy. Now this is very important. Bangladesh's deepening engagement with the United Nations. UN membership, set a seal of recognition to Bangladesh's sovereignty and independence in 1974. So Bangladesh's foreign policy values and credentials clearly demonstrate the centrality of the UN to Bangladesh foreign policy. I'll move to the next slide. Right. So you can see, at least 5 UN secretaries, with the exception of Boutros Boutros-Ghali, they made visits to Bangladesh, beginning from Kurt Waldheim to Antonio Guterres. So their visits to Bangladesh also bear the testimony that Bangladesh is seen as a very important member of the United Nations. All right. All right. Now, Bangladesh's role. Bangladesh is widely involved in the United Nations in different areas. Bangladesh has, achieved a lot of, reputation from the international level for its role played in the UN peacekeeping forces. The UN deploys thousands of peacekeepers to support peace processes and state building in countries and regions which are emerging from conflict and violence. Bangladesh has earned a towering recognition and credibility globally through its active participation in UN peacekeeping operations. Very recently, as we all know, that Bangladesh has been ranked as the top troop and police contributing country to the UN peacekeeping missions. So this is something that we should take, a pride in. I now want to focus on Bangladesh's recent successes in the elections to the UN bodies. I always feel that these are unsung diplomatic achievements of Bangladesh. Bangladesh gets elected to different agencies, bodies of the United Nations from time to time, but sometimes these news items do not carry much value to many of us. As you can see, there are different UN bodies and special agencies where Bangladesh in the last 2-3 years, achieved victories. So I'll skip these parts as well. Yes, I'll be finishing within 5 minutes. All right. Bangladesh's victories in the United Nations, different bodies of the UN system are shining examples of diplomatic skills, of Bangladesh. Bangladesh's diplomacy at the United Nations has reached a high point, according to some analysts. Bangladesh now speaks with the weight of the world community behind it, and through participation in the major organs, bodies, and special agencies of the United Nations, Bangladesh is now part of the UN diplomatic, political, and legal system. I just want to share with you one important decision of the Bangladesh government, as it's mentioned here. I feel that this was a very smart strategy choice. Bangladesh recently established a diplomatic relationship with a tiny Caribbean country, which is St. Kitts and Nevis. This particular country, is unknown to some of us. This country became a member of the United Nations in 1983. And Bangladesh, just last September, established diplomatic relations with St. Kitts and Nevis. And with the establishment of diplomatic relations, Bangladesh would expect the support of this particular country on different critical issues, at the United Nations. And also, Bangladesh, it would maximize Bangladesh's chances to receive the support of this, UN member, in various elections to international organizations and forums. Right. So the concluding reflections, Bangladesh efficiently balances increasingly diverse and complex interests on the world stage. The country has embraced a flurry of diplomacy to elevate its partnership with the United Nations. Bangladesh has a consistent and unbroken record of distinct contribution, not only to the activities of the UN, but also to its ethos and values. Bangladesh continues to provide, wealth of intellect and industry to the multilateral processes at the United Nations. Bangladesh's interactions with the United Nations increasingly reflect the maturity and a sense of self-esteem and self-assurance in foreign policy making. Bangladesh has shown a mature and competent leadership in supporting the UN's peacekeeping, development, and human rights programs. And this is a proud tradition we should, which we should enhance and continue in future. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Asant. Thank you very much, and my apologies for rushing you to.
No problem. Actually, I was at fault because I, ran extra time. Thank you so much.
I understand. I put you through a Herculean task. You were having to cover a lot of areas, but before we move over to Mr. Shahidul Haq, maybe my points of departure with you and points of reflection for you would be because you did talk a lot about stable global governance. So maybe, when we come back for the open forum, maybe our students as well as I would want to know from you that, from the perspective of Bangladesh and the global South, what does stable global governance entail? What kind of rules, what kind of norms one is talking about? What happens to the differentiations? It's not only cultural, economic, political differentiations. And in terms of global governance, what happens to the IDPs, the migrants, and the refugees, the challenges that we are facing with. These are, some of the challenges that one sees. Then you also talked about normative, normative, standard setting, legitimacy, agency, all these different aspects of international institutions, that one expects from international institutions. And you also talked about the paradox. On the one hand, one has the state sovereignty. On the other hand, the expectations are there. So, what kind of norm, who is going to, because with the Security Council, as in my introductory remarks, I said that with the Security Council, has it become a tool of hegemony? Or has it become a tool of, for the maintenance of world peace and security? So these are the different dimensions, from the perspective of Bangladesh. I think many of our students too would want to know from you when we come back to you later. And again, my Mr. Shahidul Haq, a very warm welcome to you to this virtual setting, though you had spoken to us earlier also, and we were fortunate to have you amongst us in the 100 years conference when we actually were meeting in person and the pandemic was on, and you were kind enough to give us time at that point of time also. Mr. Shahidul Haq is the former Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh and currently Senior Fellow at the North-South University. He'll be talking on the United Nations and with particular emphasis on the migrants and the Rohingya refugee crisis that Bangladesh is facing. He has first-hand experience on these two issues because he is not only, I would say by now, a refugee expert. He had been, for a long time, he had been with the IOM as well. Mr. Shahidul Haq, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me, I think, thank and congratulate Professor Ehsan for so eloquently and comprehensively deal with the UN versus state. I'll add the word versus, and then also say a lot of good things about the Bangladesh diplomacy and foreign office, which is often not the case. So thank you very much, and I'm sure that it's very well informed kind of paper and presentations. I hope you all can hear me.
Yes,
sir.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
we can.
So I will. What I'll do, I'll try and run a PowerPoint very quickly. Given the time constraints, I'll be dealing with the two case studies. One is the whole migration issue in the UN, and then whole refugee issue, especially on the Rohingya. I don't know. It looks like there's a time lag. One is the whole migration issue in the UN, and then whole refugee issue. একটু অসুবিধা হচ্ছে?
There is an echoing.
আমার এখানে কোনো সমস্যা নাই। ওখান থেকে
Right. I think it's resolved, sir. I think it's resolved.
Okay. So before I go into that, I want to sort of flag two things. One is that Bangladesh matters in UN for various reasons. There are 193 countries. Few countries naturally, because of their power and strength and a long-standing history of UN, feature out very prominently. But among the newcomers, Bangladesh features out very prominently, and I can share with you some of the experience as to why we matter. The other one is that in the multilateral forum, Bangladesh has always punched above his weight. It has played a role much bigger than Bangladesh. So that's the two kind of an opening assumptions which I'll start. Before I go into the case study, let me share with you that how what is the history of Bangladesh becoming a member of UN. We were lucky to have a generation of diplomats who defected, joined exile government representing Bangladesh, and a very able group of very young diplomats, very dedicated in the UN, not in the UN, but in the New York, to flag Bangladesh's struggle and its difficulties and rest of it. And I think they did it very successfully, and that was the beginning of Bangladesh's footprint in the UN. And when our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, came out of the exile, and in his first press interview in London, he actually emphasized two things. One is the diplomatic recognition, very natural, and the other was the whole issue of admission to the UN. So that was the first time that we started talking about it. Now, even before that, surprisingly, our proclamation of independence contains a commitment towards UN. So you can well imagine the people who were drafting these had a good deal of an exposure to the world politics, and that continue to remain as of today. And then the whole Article 25, the foreign policies realm. Now, UN was present much before Bangladesh became Bangladesh, and in fact, when from the East Pakistan, most of the diplomats and the UN official left. I was going through the history book today. There were 37 UN staff volunteered to continue to remain in Bangladesh, and they have created in those days 4 kind of a safe zone for international staff, for some of the Bangladeshis. The press, media, and core one was in the today's Sheraton Hotel. So they continue to remain despite the ongoing war, and there's a lot of vivid memory of that and story. Some of the diplomats are still alive. Then you have the whole relief operations. So we were not member of the UN, but UN was here due to a Security Council resolution, which fortunately China did not block back in '72, and that's how the relief operation could come into Bangladesh and help, which continued till 1973. But in addition to that, the picture I showed with Justice Abu Said Chaudhry, there was a delegation. It's again a historic anecdote. Bangladesh was not a member, not an observer, but our diplomats were given an entry to the UN building, and that's something very unique. And they were actually using Pakistani entry pass to continue to go and talk with the diplomats, UN diplomats inside UN, and UN kept it almost a blind eye to the whole issue, and thereby we had an opportunity to go and talk to individual delegates within the UN building. So there's something, possibly our new generation must know as to how our diplomats in a very difficult situation functioned. Bangladesh applied for membership in '72, and it was delayed because of China. Now we have almost forgotten that. And it was a fierce fight between China and the rest of the UN Security Council members. And very wisely, United States immediately decided that they can no longer remain on the wrong side of the history, and they supported or remain quiet in the whole discussion. So it is basically China opposed our entry, and eventually, when they realized that no longer can then do, Bangladesh joined '74. And this is the famous speech in Bangla of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. I often say that we walked into UN holding his hand, and we will continue to do that. And as Professor Ehsan has rightly pointed out, that Bangladesh continues to play an important role, and we see a continuity in that also. So the two thematic areas, Rohingya crisis and migration governance. Migration crisis, this is the ICJ court room picture. Now, there are three, there are 5 waves, but let's talk about 3 waves: 78, 92, and then the present one. In 78, UN, I was trying to find out this morning, UN actually did not get involved when the Rohingyas came to Bangladesh in 78. And it was done wholesale on a bilateral basis. But in the 92, UNHCR got involved, and there is a history. So that's the involvement on the Rohingya issue. And certainly, since then, UN system has been greatly involved in the Rohingya business. Now, if you look at these 4 areas of sustainable return of Rohingyas, you will see that UN is almost present everywhere. It has human rights issues, holding perpetrators to justice in terms of genocide, root causes, safety, security, and livelihood. So we'll go back into that. You know, I think we need to sort of focus separately on the whole issue of accountability and justice. And in the accountability of justice, the whole issue is based on the UN. You cannot do that without UN involvement, and that's why I think there are a lot of possibilities, but there are also a lot of challenges for Bangladesh to continue to remain engaged with the UN. And in this context, I want to flag that Bangladesh kept the whole thing bilateral till 2017. And in the 2017, the government of Bangladesh, under the leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, after a lot of debate, decided to take it to the UN and to the Security Council. So till then, it was bilateral issue. In fact, it is not surprising for many of your students and teachers that till 2016, Bangladesh was holding the hand of Myanmar in the Human Rights Council and other places, and trying to protect them, save them, and voting in favor of them. So that's something you have to keep in mind, that 2017, the whole multilateralization of the issue has been a very dramatic shock for Myanmar. Myanmar still continues to ponder why it happened the way it happened. Now, in terms of your resolutions and activities, the Secretary General, in particular the present Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has been consistently raising the flag on the Rohingya. And after a long time, a Secretary General has written a letter to the Security Council on a migration and refugee issues. And he wrote a very strong letter in 2017 to the Security Council, saying that please wake up, and this is a great threat to humanity, to peace and stability. So for that he has to be congratulated, and that's how the Security Council every term they have to bring it up. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, that's where actually the whole issue has always been anchored, and for some reason or other, I still could not find out as to why Bangladesh has to hold the hand of Myanmar till 2014 and vote in favor of Myanmar against the resolution on the Myanmar human rights issues. That remains a mystery. Will possibly some student will do a research and find out why this and not the otherwise. If that were not the case, possibly would have been better off right now. So I'll not go into detail. I have shared this PowerPoint with Professor Amina Mohsin. So if you're interested, you can look at it. In terms of Security Council, in fact, Security Council took up first time the Rohingya issue in 2017 after it received a strong letter from the Secretary General, and since then it has continually been dealing with it, either within the UN Security Council procedure or outside UN Security Council system, but without having to adopt a resolution because of primarily Chinese, Russians, and Indonesians, and Japanese, because both two are non-permanent members till recently, opposed a new resolution, even a joint statement. And in that, only United States and European countries who are Rohingyas friend, no other than that. So it shouldn't come as a surprise when I say Indonesia and Japan, along with Russia and China, and we look forward to see how India behaves when it joins on the 1st of January next year. Now, in terms of visits, Secretary General has visited Cox's Bazar along with the World Bank chief and the emergency coordinator. That was a very historic visit. I don't think they have visited together anywhere, and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and IOM chief and everybody. I'm told that that was the heaviest delegates ever went to anywhere, and I think it's because of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, because he's a refugee person, so he takes a special interest on that. And then there has been a visit of special representatives in both in terms of sexual violence, children's, and the ICJ. I will not go into that. And then we have this R2P mechanism coming in force, and also the IIIM. So UN, what I'm trying to make you understand that UN is heavily engaged in the Rohingya issue in its own within its own capacity and limitations. So this is the last slide on this. What is the limitations? UN has failed to prevent a genocide in Myanmar. Let's be very clear about it. There is now a report available, which is called Gert Rosenthal's report, which actually does a very good study of the period before and after genocide till 2019, and sees how UN system has failed to stop a genocide. Now, I may sound very very harsh, but this is the first time I'm bringing this up, because I could not earlier because of my position. Not only that, when 2016 and 17, our High Commissioner, our Ambassador Sufi Rahman, who is currently in Australia, was sending us secret mails saying that things looks pretty abnormal in that northern Rakhine, and it looks like there will be again an onslaught by the military on Rohingyas, and we need to do something. So we simultaneously from Dhaka activated our Geneva mission, our New York mission, and also we asked him that why don't you go see and write a letter to the UNRC. I'll not name the UNRC, you all know him, her. And then, I digged out those emails where I was copied as a foreign secretary. Appalling, absolutely appalling on the part of the UN, where UN officials even were not have the guts to pass on the whole thing to New York, including the report that one of the UN colleague drafted, World Health Program, saying that things are going bad to worse. We have to do something, and apparently there is also a history which possibly one day will come out. They said we need to do quite diplomacy, otherwise we will all be thrown out of Myanmar. So for the sake of not being thrown out, you can sacrifice thousands of lives in a genocide. That's what I'm trying to bring it out. So except High Commissioner for Human Rights, all the UN agencies have been extremely extremely cautious in calling spade a spade, and it continues to be remain so. They think and what the rationale they put forward, that if these things are before the elections bring it up, then the whole democracy will fall apart. I don't know what kind of a democracy they are talking about. Maybe a democracy which we are not aware of. So this is on the Rohingya issue. So you have to also understand that when we were negotiating with the UN, we had to also struggle against these sentiments. Even when we were going to ICJ, I'll not name, some of the UN colleagues here said that Bangladesh should be extremely careful in going to ICJ, thereby creating a status quo on the whole issue. And some colleagues, UN colleagues, shared with me some of the examples where the genocide cases will linger on, and the issue festered around. So, and we said absolutely no. We could not seek proper justice for our 1971 genocide, and some of us are still alive who have seen ponded full of dead bodies of our own people, at least we should not be blamed for not doing the same to our Rohingya friends. So that's my personal view on this. So I'll go. How much time do you have, Professor Mohsin?
You can carry on. Like,
Okay, I'll try and do justice to this.
no, you have.
You have 25 minutes. You have, sir.
Okay. What I'll do, on the migration issue, I can speak. I've written a book on this, but what I'll draw. I'm very happy that Professor Hassan has brought out the whole conceptual framework of governance, because that's what the current UN is struggling with. You know, I'll start with the anecdote. As Professor Mohsin has said, that I was in the IOM, and I was a director at the policy and governance department. They don't call it governance, policy and donor relations. So I pulled out of the field, took over the division, and then we went to an official retreat. And my initial days, euphoria and all kinds of things. So I made a presentation on, and this was in 2008. I still keep the presentation, and there's a reason behind it. And I said that IOM should change the way it looks at migration, from migration management to migration governance, and bring in human rights heavily into its work. And it was 2008, where people were not talking about governance and other things. You wouldn't believe, when I made the presentation, after that, some of the people were not even talking to me. They thought I have brought an issue onto the platform called migration governance, which I shouldn't have, and why I didn't discuss with senior colleagues. And strangely enough, in 2 years' time, IOM not only accepted the migration governance concept, it has a resolution on it. So, when we talk about international organization, it is not only the member state, but also the individual functionaries in the system and their own attitude, own mindset, representations. And that's why, so much of a hallaballa that why there are not enough people from the developing countries, why there are not enough women into the system. Because of this, because these international organization has been monopolized for long by a group of citizens. And they love status quo. They love to sort of keep their own national interest. Although then they take an oath, I took an oath that I will not keep my any allegiance to Bangladesh, but for the international or for the IOM. But in reality, that's a different story. So that's why I think I like Professor Ehsan that definition, because you know why? Because the Ramesh Thakur, he is a UN colleague. So governance concept has not been accepted, and strangely enough, even the developing countries were not accepting it, because they were thinking it is the governance of America, and Americans were thinking it's the governance for human rights. So all kinds of and then he, being a smart fellow, said that I will give you different definitions, which he gave and which Professor Ehsan had shared with us, and there has been a lot of controversy on that definition because it doesn't have human rights component into it. How can you have a governance without human rights? So anyway, that's something I thought the students of international relations should know. Okay, what is migration? Migration are 4 different kinds of mobility. One is you go out for work, education, family reunification, which is basically fair migration, talent mobility, and all kinds of. Then you have irregular migration, trafficking and human being. So then you have a cross-border displacement, Rohingya came to Bangladesh. And then we have the refugees. These 4 mobility, the way it was conceived in the Second World War period, was thought to be a 4 different stream, and there was no interface between the 4. There was no mixing of migration till 2010 and 15, when people realized that when people move, they don't say I'm a refugee, I'm a trafficker, I'm a family unification. They all move together, especially in Europe and other places. So then how do you deal with that? And then you have the refugees with there is a specific regime for it. Refugees also move with traffickers, with the smugglers. We know now. Those debates continue to haunt the system, and there we from Bangladesh side we have been promoting that if the migration is mixed, its solution has to be mixed. You cannot have UNHCR dealing with refugees and then IOM dealing only with migrants, and then UNODC dealing with trafficking and smuggling, and then cross-border displacement, no agency. So how do you solve it? So that continue to haunt, and that's where the challenges are. Now, UN did not officially take up migration issue till late 1990s. Does it come as a surprise to you? Some of the students, at least it should. How come UN did not take up migration as an issue till 1990? You know why? Because of Americans and Europeans' huge opposition. Russians and Chinese, they said, this is a bilateral issue. It has nothing to do with the UN till 1990. Let me give you an history. Migration was one of the pillars of in League of Nations. Number one. When WTO had its first life after First World War, there was a international trading regime established. It was never came into force through what you call Havana Declaration. And in that, there were three pillars of trade system. One is that time there was no service. It's the migration, is the trade in services, cross-border movement, and there was something else. But United States never joined International Trade Organization, ITO, and it collapsed in the Second World War. And then you have GATS. Now, when the GATS came in, the Americans were by then very smart. They left the whole mobility of people out of it, and it came back through a kind of a hidden door, which is called movement of national person. I have a publication on this. It's a fuzzy way of hiding migration within the trading regime. So this is how UN system actually does disservice to the human beings. Migration is such an important component, and you don't feel like taking it up till 1990, and that again after huge tussle that I will narrate to you, because they thought if you multilateralized or unionized migration, you actually sacrifice sovereignty. Then what happens to the health? What happens to education? What happens to trade? Aren't you also given up part of your sovereignty in order for international organization to bring in some normative structure into the behavior of the state or regulating behavior, as Professor Ehsan has rightly pointed out? So, but there is not yet single unified global regime to govern migration. So it's a huge definition, and I'm glad that Professor Mohsin asked me to talk about it, because in this Bangladesh and some of the developing countries have a huge stake. We have been fighting on the floor for having a regime like refugee regime, but unfortunately, as of now, we don't have it, and we'll come back to that. And there's no global consensus either. Now, this is the one I was talking about when I was a director. I did not took the whole thing lightly, and I tried to mobilize the opinion of the member states, saying that you don't want to govern migration, then how do you solve it? Do you think that people who are on the move, even the talents, they don't have rights? Why states are giving them some kind of a right, including them voting rights? So, and then we adopted a sort of a working definitions, actually partly borrowed from Thakur. This is a functional definition. Systems of institution, legal frameworks, mechanism, and practices regulating migration and protecting migrants. So this is a compromise, and all IOM members accepted it. I had the word governance here, but it did not survive in the negotiation. So I said, okay, can you define that migrants do not need protection? So in the definition came in protecting migrants. That was 2008, 2009, 9-10. So, and then subsequently IOM was the first organization to have a governance framework. And we had sleepless night before we take it up to the council, because we don't know which member is going to raise the flag and say that, we don't accept these definitions and others. So very incrementally, the whole issue of protection, whole issue of human rights were brought into migration. Some of the countries, including Bangladesh, Egypt, Philippines, Morocco, I'm trying to name, who else? Some of those countries were extremely useful in terms of helping us to bring in a structure into the whole thing. Now, I think I will rush through quickly. ILO was one of the organizations which talked about protecting migrant workers almost at the same time when it was established, because they looked at migrant workers as a worker, not as a migrant. So that's the dichotomy. But it, again, voluntary issues. It was not a regime, and there has been then a lot of discussion. The first breakthrough came in what is famously known as ICPD conference, Cairo 1994. There was 2 chapters, one on the whole issue of internal migration, chapter 9, and chapter 10 on the international migration. And in that, there was a proposal that UN will hold an international conference on migration and development. And every year the resolution used to come, and every year America and some of the developed countries and the China, and they just used to walk out. So we couldn't have anything in the UN till 1990. But every issue has a day. So we'll show you how the whole thing came in. But migration was becoming a global threat to peace, both in terms of security, in terms of irregular mobility, in terms of management. There were people who were dying in the sea, all kinds of stories. Women were violated. So, UN could not anymore keep their eyes shut. So, Kofi Annan, being one of the insider of UN, said that, okay, let's do a commission. It was a 19-member commission called GCIM, and it was outside UN, but it will report to Kofi Annan. Kind of a very innovative way of functioning of international organization. This is something, international students also see, that if an international organization wants to do something and member states do not agree, then how do you make the detour and make the state understand that this is important? And that's what the Kofi Annan did. He being insider, he said, okay, let's have a 19-member commission. The commission will do 2 years of study and bring out something on the migration. That was the first ever global study on migration done by semi-UN. That was the beginning, and I'm extremely happy because I was party to the whole process from the IOM side. And I think I keep one of the original report with me, because absolutely spot on the whole issue of migration. And that also shows that you can actually bypass UN and do things we need to be done. And subsequently, there has been a lot of other practices like IIIM and R2P, all are bypassing Security Council and UN. Okay, I'll run quickly. And now it is much easier, because then we have the Global Forum on Migration and Development. You remember 2016, Bangladesh was the chair, when we brought the whole governance issue up. My UN colleague used to say, so you got dropped in the IOM for bringing in governance issue and being a chair of the GCM. Now you are actually only talking about governance and nothing else. That's what we did. We only talked about governance. We written letter to the Secretary General, and that is why we have today the Compact on Migration and Development. Because when 2015 crisis came in, the refugee organization is very smart. They wanted to have a compact to broaden their 51 convention ratifying states, and IOM being IOM did not think about it. So we being the chair, we wrote a letter to the Secretary General, said that if migration has need a compact among the states in terms of understanding principles, then we should also have one for migration. The other area where I think Bangladesh delegation singularly credited is bringing in the migration into the SDG. In the MDG, it wasn't there. So in the SDG, we brought migration back, and I'll be very candid with you. I hope you keep that with that spirit. Almost on the last phase, one of the GCC countries colleague at 3 o'clock in the morning came to us and said that, if you do not withdraw a particular para, which is 10C, and a chapeau, then we are going to object. This was all two things. One, that migrants have the right despite their legal status. That was the major breakthrough. And then we did maneuvering. We went to the Europeans and said that, look, you have brought in LGBT issue into the SDG. We are going to oppose it if you do not support us in the migration front. So if Bangladesh opposes, it will be very difficult, because that was the deadline that morning, Saturday morning, that it has to pass through. Then whole thing falls flat. And then I think the European went to the GCC country and said, shut up. Let Bangladesh have this one. And that's how it was adopted. That was a major breakthrough. And that's why some of the countries are fighting is very difficult, that they have to have some rights, human rights, also for migrants who are not in a legal situation in that country. And that brings in a different kind of responsibility into the regime. And we were building up a migration regime in the absence of the governance concept. So that's how it came in. Now, I have already talked about it. I will not, I know that these are some of the principles. So in the absence of a regime, what we did, some of the developing countries within the Global Forum on Migration Development, we said, okay, let's bring in principles. Nobody can oppose principles of governing migration, of managing migration, whatever you want to say. So these are some of the things that came out subsequently. And I can tell you that international organizations never helped us in this, never helped us in this, as of today. Now, these are the principles that we have. I will not go into that. It needs, I take a class on the whole thing. Now, what is the failure of the UN? This is the last slide. There is still not legally binding UN instrument to govern migration. Still non-binding. Compact is a non-binding instrument. Although we have a 1990 Migrant Worker Convention, but none of the destination country, developed country, ever signed it. I'm an independent member of the Worker Convention, because it's like discussing among the converts. So 54 countries. No reference to the group governance in the compact. That was the compromise that we had to make. The compact is 152 countries, America and others worked out. There would have been much more defections if we have insisted on keeping the concept governance. We said, okay, we don't use the word governance, but we use the word principles. So that was the innovation that we made. And we told the Secretariat that bring in all the principles that need for human being to survive with humanity. But that will apply here. And that's why we have 10 principles, but the governance word is not there. Doesn't matter, the principle is there. And that principle is currently being implemented, including by the European countries. In terms of when it comes to implementation, some of the international organizations were so reluctant to implement compact opposed to refugee compact, and there's yet no central UN office to deal with compact of migration. It has been given to IOM to implement. So control and sovereignty concerns overwhelms migration governance. And in that, the UN bodies, the international organization have never helped migrants, forget about states, never helped migrants in terms of restoring their human rights. I think I'll pass this one. I think revisit migration governance. This is something we are trying to promote. We have now presented something to the government to deal with it, that we need a new order for governing migration. That we have trade order, health order, you also should have migration orders. And we have spelled it out in that paper through a global dialogue, and where Bangladesh should again take the leadership. As you know, our Prime Minister was first to talk about compact of migration in 2016 UNGA. So it almost came as a surprise that what she's talking about, then we had actually a pamphlet ready which we circulated. But the objective should be not keeping the international organization happy, not states happy, but keep migrants happy. And that is one of the last jigsaw in the UN system. last jigsaw. The rest has been put in place. Still, countries are extremely reluctant, especially America and some of the other countries, to give full rights to migrants. Thank you. Sorry for being so elaborate and boring.
No, no, no. It was an excellent presentation. Mr. Shahidullah, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And for walking us through a very wide canvas of both the academic and as well as conceptual, and giving us a first-hand view of, what you saw it from sitting there, from the horse's mouth. Are not only our colleagues, but I'm sure our students have also been largely benefited by it. And thank you very much for being so candid. Indeed, UN has not only failed in Myanmar, it has failed in avoiding, preventing many more genocides. If you look around us today, the kinds of human rights violations that are going on, it has failed. Many instances, in those instances. And when you talk about, incrementalism in governance, that is also, I think, a very critical issue that you bring about very candidly. And the individual aspect of it, I mean, what struck me was that how, individuals can shape and what changes they can bring about. That is also, I think, that is a major take for our students that, it's not that you're only governed by the structure, but also that constructivism has a role to play in it, that how you give different meanings to the realities around you, how can you play around it. I'm sure our students and colleagues over here, they would have many observations and questions, and indeed, it was a very good mixture, I must say, that Ihsan covering up the conceptual part of it, and you coming in with the conceptual as well as the practitioner's point of view. The floor is now open for discussion. And we have, 30 minutes are in our, almost 30 minutes in our hand, and if required, we can overshoot by 10 to 15 minutes. That's okay with us. Floor is now open. I would request the participants to either raise their hands or to just speak out. And also we have Ashraf, Niloy, and Atik with us. They are monitoring the chat box and the Facebook. If there are comments, observations, they will read it out. I would request you to please go ahead. Ashraf, will you volunteer, please? Ashraf, you have a question?
Yes, madam. A quick question. I would like to congratulate both speakers for their wonderful and very comprehensive talks. I really enjoyed Ihsan sir talking about the theoretical debates in the study of international institutions, like how he brought up the Myanmar's, Myanmar's decisively skeptical attitudes toward the institutions versus the Robert Cuvan's optimistic tone. But I have a question for Ambassador Shahidul Haq. First of all, I must be very candid saying that it looks like you are rebelling against, some of your earlier conservative positions, coming out of the bureaucratic garb and becoming more academic, and it is very enjoying to see that happening. My question is the way you discuss the Rohingya issue and the silence of the UN community, except for the UN Human Rights Council, was quite fascinating. My question is more onto the role of the government of Bangladesh. And as a student of IR, we know that, the concept of smart power tells us that you try diplomacy and soft power, and hard power becomes an option in the table. If soft power fails, some kind of hard power can be exercised in the achievement of the foreign policy, and that makes it smart power. You combine hard and soft power, and we get smart power. Now I refer to your your talk that you said that our envoy in Myanmar, Ambassador Sofur, he did send some early warning. And my question is, did we have any contingency plan that if the bilateral and multilateral processes fail, did we ever plan for any contingency scenarios where Bangladesh should take preemptive measures to prevent the influx of such a large number of displaced Myanmari citizens in our neighborhood? That's one question. And second thing, you never talked about the safe haven option today. That safe zone, the safe zone, and interestingly, there is no discourse in Bangladesh regarding what could be possibly a safe zone. And even when our Prime Minister talked about this option in the UNGA speech, I don't see Bangladesh Ministry of Foreign Affairs even developing any concept paper to inform the Bangladeshi citizens that what kind of concept is safe zone and what needs to be, what kind of diplomatic initiatives needs to be mobilized to get a safe zone in Myanmar. That's my question, sir.
Okay. Shall I go ahead?
Can we take 2 more
Absolutely.
questions?
Absolutely.
Yes, Niloy, Atik, Ashraf, you see any questions here?
I can read out 2 or 3 questions that are there in the Zoom chat box. So we have one questions to both the distinguished speakers on, let me read out. So Mr. Abedin says that I have a query on the contributions in peacekeeping in the critical conditions such as Rohingya issues. But why our position is not that much strong in case of decision making in the UN committees regarding peacekeeping. So that was one question. The second question was
Peacekeeping in the Rohingya context, no?
In the Rohingya context, that was not mentioned, but probably the question
I think that's
in
what
such a way. Yeah,
he meant. Yes.
The second question was what would be our course of action or standpoint to repatriate the Rohingyas in their country if there is no support from India and China? How are we going to make it and what is the scope of hope? The last question, I think this was more a comment again. In the Rohingya case, UN could force Myanmar with Security Council or International Court of Justice or Human Rights Councils, but they are not interested in that. They are more interested in refugee support programs. Is that a right step or is it a wrong step? So these are some of the questions. If there are more, I can come back.
Okay, thank you. I can see Nahian Raza. He has raised his hand. Yes, Nahian, please go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, sir, both of you for such amazing presentation. And it's a bit nostalgic actually to go back to the department and listening to my teachers giving lectures. And I think it's a privilege for us. And also I am an admirer of Ambassador Shahidul Haq, and it's been a pleasure as well. My question is also to the Ambassador, His Excellency. I would like to connect to the Rohingya question as well. I was actually going through the Universal Periodic Review of Bangladesh by the UNHCR, and one thing we always face when we actually talk about someone from other countries or someone from other disciplines, that they come up with the argument that Bangladesh is not a signatory of the 1951 convention related to the status of the refugees, or the 1967 protocol, or the 1954 convention related to the status of the stateless person, as well as the 1961 convention on the reduction of the statelessness. And as I'm mentioning the the periodic review, I can remember at least 4 times or like 5 times they mentioned about this, and it somehow sounded like they were trying to legitimize the thing that Bangladesh cannot have access to some kind of privileges or some kind of rights regarding this kind of thing because we are not signatory of those conventions or protocols. So I would like to know your opinion on this, or whether you think this is actually a problem, or can we also become a signatory of that? Will that increase our opportunities and also the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Nayan. Before I request our panelists to respond, I would like to say that if you want, আমি ছাত্রদেরকে বলছি তোমরা বাংলায়ও প্রশ্ন করতে পারো, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই।
Absolutely.
Thank you. Shahidul would like to respond, and Ihsan, I think some of the questions were open,
Yes.
both of you know, among between you, you can respond. Mr. Shahidullah, if you
can I respond? Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Ehsan, আগে যদি যেতে চান, please go ahead.
Sure. No, sir, you can go ahead. No problem.
Lot of questions. I don't know whether we have time. Professor Ashraf, you have rightly pointed out my strong advocacy. I've always been an advocate. The only thing that as a diplomat, as a foreign secretary, sitting foreign secretary, you just cannot have the debate outside. But I'm sure that you have students, and the students who are civil servant now, and some of them had accompanied me in various delegations where I have been equally vocal, whether it is Chinese or Indians, and I have also suffered for that, but I take that with a lot of satisfaction, that I could say things which need to be said to both the delegation, and I continue to do that. But I never did that in public. But now I do it in public. But that's there in my blood, and that's why possibly I had in my career changed 3-4 times, including serving in military in early stage. So you can see that. So it's not something. Those who know me, they know me. So it's not something new. On the role of government of Bangladesh, I think the Bangladesh's foreign policy is based on peace and development. Very plainly, সকলের সাথে বন্ধুত্ব, কারোর সাথে শত্রুতা নয়. Now, when you actually operationalize this concept, it actually creates a huge challenge for diplomats. Do you realize that as an academicians? So the thing that you are talking about, the hard power and soft power, not that we were not trained in that, not that we haven't had this mind, but that was not an option given to us. So since the option was not given to us, at that particular point of time, we didn't think about it. So we only looked at the soft power. So within the soft power exercises, what that we could do. Before I come to that, let me clarify one thing. It really pains me when I hear that whether the Foreign Office was ready, did they study, were there a contingency plan? You know, we were prepared as back as 2013. The Foreign Office, that's why it took the whole issue before it didn't become an issue, big issue. 2012, the cabinet presented a paper, and cabinet, after long deliberation, gave 6 points. Come back with a new paper, which we went in 2013. I presented this second paper, and it was a huge experience and advantage. I was just came back after a long break in the government service, so I was little less fearful of consequences. You know, so I said what need to be said about these people, and then the cabinet, and I think it's also our Prime Minister, with huge respect on these areas, had a vision. She said, no, we have to systematically address these issues. It can no longer be kept ad hoc. You know, so you understand all the discussions went silent. That হঠাৎ করে আমাদেরকে কেন একটা স্ট্র্যাটেজি করতে হবে, এটা করলে তো মনে হবে যে এদেরকে আমরা এখানে এখন জামাই বানায় রাখবো, এরকম কথাবার্তা আর কি. I said, nothing to do with জামাই বানায় রাখা. As a state, there is people who are on your soil. You have to have a strategy, and strategy doesn't mean that only keeping them? How about strategy of sending them back? How sort of innovating new diplomacy? So that was the beginning of it, and the whole thing became eventually a cabinet paper, which I hope one day will come out with the 5 proposals. And that time we also were lucky to have a group of officers in various places who were very capable. Not that they are not still in the system, they are in the system. So we said, let's do the study, whether Rohingyas are Rohingya or Rohingyas are Bengali. Yeah? Let's have our answer first. So we prepared actually a 12-pager, which is still available in the Foreign Office, in end of 2013. And we do a very intensive research. We went to actually London to do research, and luckily we got what is famously known as Baxter report. We got the original. We looked at the original copy of the Baxter report, where it was done just before 1948, their independence, to find out that Myanmar কে কোথায় থাকে ethnic community তে, এবং এই রোহিঙ্গারা তখন রোহিঙ্গা about 60% তখন ওখানে বলা ছিল যে ইন্ডিয়ান অরিজিন মুসলিম রোহিঙ্গা পপুলেশন। সো ওইটা আমাদের ফার্স্ট পয়েন্ট অফ রেফারেন্স ছিল যে এরা তো আমাদের এখান থেকে যায় নাই, কারণ মিয়ানমার সবসময় বলে যে এরা রোহিঙ্গারা তো আসলে বাঙালি, বাংলাদেশ থেকে আসছে। So we had that paper, and also we established that Rohingya have a distinct ethnic identity, which now ICJ has established, recognized. They're separate people who need special protection. So these 2 things we started circulating globally, very what is called covert diplomacy. আমরা যেখানে সুযোগ পেয়েছি ওইটা হ্যান্ড ওভার করেছি, and we said that look, this is what the problem is in the making, and this will be a security problem, stability problem. So একটা ক্লিয়ার করে দিই যে আমরা প্রস্তুত ছিলাম। ইনফ্যাক্ট অগস্ট 2017 এর 22, 23, 24 আমাদের হোল টাস্ক ফোর্স ওয়াজ ইন কক্সেস বাজার, and we could see problem in the making. Not that we were not aware, we were not caught by surprise. Now the question is, we had 2 options. একটা হলো এদেরকে না আসতে দেওয়া। আপনারা জানেন 6-7 দিন কিন্তু আমরা বর্ডারকে ভালো করে সিল করে রেখেছিলাম না। সো দ্যাট ওয়াজ দ্য ফার্স্ট অপশন দ্যাট আওয়ার অনারেবল প্রাইম মিনিস্টার থট, আচ্ছা দেখা যাক না কি হয়। এরকম তো হতে পারে যে ওরা ফিরে গেল আবার ওদের গ্রামে, তখন আমরা জানলাম যে ওদের গ্রামে আগুন লাগিয়ে দিয়েছে। হ্যাঁ, দ্যাট ওয়াজ দি আদার রিজন আগুন লাগানোর। তো তারপরে দেখা গেল যে না, ইট উইল বি ইনহিউম্যান, অ্যাবসলিউটলি গো এগেইনস্ট আওয়ার ফিলসফি। সো Prime Minister decided after a debate that এদেরকে আসতে দিতে হবে, তারপর আমরা দেখি কি করা যায়। সো ন্যাচারালি তারপরের ইতিহাস তো আপনাদের জানা। আমরা কিন্তু তখন থেকেই চিন্তা করছি যে এটা বাইল্যাটারালি সলভ করা যাবে না, বাট উই হ্যাড টু ডিপ্লোমেসিতে এটা ইজ লাইক আ কোরাস, আপনি দেখবেন যে ওই সেকেন্ড ফিডল, ফোর্থ ফিডল থাকে না যখন বড় কোয়ার হয়, ওরও কিন্তু একটা রোল আছে। তো আমাদের ডিপ্লোমেসিতে কিন্তু বাইল্যাটারাল একটা রোল আছে, কিন্তু দ্যাট মে নট বি দ্য মেজর ভোকালিস্ট, মে নট বি দ্য মেজর মিউজিক, কিন্তু ওইটার দরকার আছে। ওইটা না হলে বড় মিউজিকটা ভালো শোনা যায় না। তো সেই জন্য আমরা বাইল্যাটারাল করেছি। সো বাইল্যাটারাল করাতে যেটা হয়েছে, অনেকে ক্রিটিসাইজ করে, বাট বাইল্যাটারাল করতে 2টো জিনিস হয়েছে। একটা হলো ওদেরকে আমরা বাইল্যাটারালে যে শক্ত কথা আমরা বলেছি, যখন কোনোদিন যদি এটা লেখা হয় এবং লেখা হবে, তখন দেখবেন যে বাংলাদেশ কত শক্ত করে জিনিসগুলো বাইল্যাটারালি বলেছে। এবং আমরা এটাও বলেছি, আমরা এখনো মনে আছে, বলেছি যে ইফ ইউ ফেল টু অ্যাড্রেস দিস কম্প্রিহেন্সিভলি এন্ড ব্রিং দিস পিপল ব্যাক, দিস রোহিঙ্গাস উইল হন্ট ইউ ফর রেস্ট অফ ইউর লাইফ। এক্স্যাক্টলি তাই হয়েছে, because they never could think that আমরা ইউএনএ যাব। 2 নম্বর, ইউএনএ গেলেও হয়তো যেতে পারি, কিন্তু আমরা যে অ্যাকাউন্টেবিলিটি এন্ড জাস্টিস মেকানিজমে যাব, এইটা ডিড নট প্রেডিক্ট, বিকজ বাই দেন তারা বাংলাদেশের ভালো সাইডটা দেখে অভ্যস্ত, কিন্তু বাঙালি যে খেপে গেলে কি করে সেটা দেখে অভ্যস্ত না। পাকিস্তানের একবার দেখেছিল, তখন আমরা তাদেরকে কিন্তু আর্লি ওয়ার্নিং দিয়েছিলাম যে তোমরা যদি এটা বাইল্যাটারালি সলভ না করো, we'll go to all our places. We are not in 71, we are not in 75. We are not even in 80s, and it's a new generation of diplomats. You will see us functioning, and by then they were also started realizing that things were going back towards. Anyway, beside the point. So সেই জন্য আমরা একসাথে কিন্তু 6-7টা ফ্রন্ট ওপেন করেছি, কিন্তু bilateral front আমরা এখনো খুলে রাখতে চাই, because at the end it is bilateral means which will bring the whole thing to a resolution act. 2 নম্বর হলো সেফ জোনের কথা আজকে বলি নাই, কারণ সেফ জোন itself needs a session, but সেফ জোনের উপরে আমার একটা আর্টিকেল আছে 2017-তে। একটু সময় দিলে আমি বলি স্টোরি টেলিং। সেটা হলো যে 2017-তে আমরা যখন প্রধানমন্ত্রী নিউ ইয়র্কে গেলেন, তখন আমরা ডিবেট করলাম যে এটাকে কি আমরা জেনোসাইড বলবো, কারণ প্রফেসর সেন অলরেডি 2014-তে এটাকে জেনোসাইড বলে আর্টিকেল লিখেছেন। লো আইন ইনস্টিটিউটের একটা আর্টিকেলই আছে, বইয়ের একটা বই আছে পুরো 2014-15-তে করা। তো এটাকে জেনোসাইড বলবো না আমরা এথনিক ক্লিনজিং বলবো নাকি আর কিছু বলবো? তো অনেক কিছু বলার পরে প্রধানমন্ত্রী সিদ্ধান্ত নিলেন না ঠিক আছে, অত শক্ত হওয়ার দরকার নেই, এখন আমরা এথনিক ক্লিনজিং বলি। উই ওয়ার হ্যাপি, প্রথম চোটে এসে আমরা এথনিক ক্লিনজিং বলে দিলাম, and 5-point proposal with a safe zone proposal. তো যখন আমরা ethnic cleansing বলেছি, it was like a dropping in a nuclear bomb in the UNGA. All of a sudden from 0 to 100 এ আমরা শুট করেছি। তারপরে তো সিকিউরিটি আমরা আমাদের পিআরকে বলেছে যে তোমরা যে সেফ জোনের কথা বললে এটা কি জিনিস। So we had a 2-pager ready. So we gave it to them. This is the idea. We are not talking about a peacekeeping operation. What we are talking about, a safe zone where these Rohingyas can go back, and those who are there, they are safe. You can't send them to the detention center or concentration camp like Hitler did. And it can be monitored by even the ASEAN peacekeepers or ASEAN monitoring agencies. You don't have to have Western people coming in and doing it. So that was the whole safe zone, and still continue to remain relevant. আমার মনে হয় যে এখানে আমার ইউএন এর কথা আবার বলতে হয়। Our UN colleagues were very unhappy that এই তোমরা কোথা থেকে কি সব আইডিয়া বার করে নিয়ে আসো, তারপর সবাই এটার পিছনে দৌড়াইতে থাকে, এইটা তো কোনোদিনই ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশন হবে না। আমি বললাম তাহলে তো ডিপ্লোমেসি কিছু শিখোই নাই। ডিপ্লোমেসিতে 10টা প্রপোজাল থাকে, একটাও ম্যাটেরিয়ালাইজ হয় না, তারপরে 10টা প্রপোজাল আনতে হয়। দ্যাটস হাউ ইউ ক্রিয়েট এ প্রেশার। And see, I think the safe zone will eventually be adopted by the ICJ, if not anyone else. So that is it. আমরা যখন প্রথম আরটিপির কথা বললাম রোহিঙ্গাদের, বলে না 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 এটা তো নন স্টার্টার। What is non starter? When a state fails to take care of its own citizen, then you have RTP, and that's the doctrine. You have an office for that. And you know, I remember having a debate on with the director, and then said, of course, I said, closely monitor every time we want a report, the way you report on other atrocity crimes. And that's what's happening. এখন অনেকে বলতে পারে যে এত কিছু করে লাভ হলো কি? না করলে কি লাভ হতো? না করলে কি রোহিঙ্গারা ফিরে যেত? বরঞ্চ করার কারণে কিন্তু লং টার্মে একটা ফল আসবে বলে আমরা মনে করি। আমার মনে হয় পিসকিপিং উত্তরটা এখানেই দিয়ে দিয়েছি। আমরা এখনই ওই লেভেলে এসকালেট করতে চাই না, বাট দ্যাটস অ্যান অপশন। It might happen one day. It might happen one day. On the issue of Nahian's 51 convention, আসলে এইটা মানে আমার পক্ষে খুব ডিফিকাল্ট উত্তর দেওয়া, বিকজ আমি 1951 কনভেনশন পড়াই, সুতরাং I have a place in heart for that. বাট আমার মনে হয় যে অনেক এশিয়ান দেশের মতো বাংলাদেশ এই মুহূর্তে ঠিক প্রস্তুত না 51 কনভেনশন এন্ড আদার রিলেটেড ইনস্ট্রুমেন্টস সই করার। বাট 1951 এর যে বেসিক অব্লিগেশনস সেইগুলো কিন্তু স্টেট হিসাবে আমরা অলরেডি পালন করছি। ফলে আমার মনে হয় যে এটা নিয়ে ডিবেট করার দরকার নেই, আনলেস ইউ ডিসাইড টু ওয়ার্ক ফর UNHCR. থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you very much. Ihsan?
Yes, there was a question about very frustrating role played by China and India on the question of Rohingya repatriation. We all know that both China and India are guided by their national interests. So and both India and China have invested heavily in Myanmar. So beginning from 2009-10, India and China were trying to make encroachment into Myanmar, and they got involved in different types of economic activities in Myanmar. So they established very intimate relationship with Myanmar. So there is an economic logic behind India and China's disappointing role on the question of Rohingya repatriation. Although, recently Chinese government has given us an assurance that, they would be doing everything possible for the quick repatriation of Rohingya people, but there are still a lot of skepticisms about the possibility of repatriation. It's not going to be a very easy task. There are a lot of complications, and there is also a question of the role played by larger international community. So in the short term, there is the possibility, I think, is extremely low, but it may, as Ambassador Shahidul has mentioned, that we need to wait for some more time, and we have acted with a lot of sagacity and patience. We feel that whatever was required to be done at the bilateral level, we went for everything. We signed 2 agreements with Myanmar, first in 2017 and then in 2018. But unfortunately, we have seen that these 2 agreements failed to produce any expected result for us. But there are criticisms as well, that why did Bangladesh sign those agreements with Myanmar? Those were non-binding agreements. But on the other hand, Bangladesh, believes in, policy of peace and compromise. So there was no other option left for Bangladesh that, we would not be going for, any kind of opportunity, which was available for us to conclude any kind of agreement with Myanmar. There was also pressure from the Chinese government, about Bangladesh's conclusion of agreement. I remember Chinese Foreign Minister visited, Bangladesh, before we decided to sign the agreement. So you have to take all these things into consideration. Professor Amina Muhsin, you asked me something about the possibility of Security Council reform. You mentioned that whether Security Council, UN Security Council can be seen as a tool of hegemony. Yes, I agree with you. The issue of UN Security Council reform, has been lingering for more than 1 decade. As far as I remember, sometime in 2004-5, the then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, made a proposal about expanding the UN permanent membership in the UN Security Council. But there are 4 candidates, for Security Council membership, permanent membership in the Security Council: India, Japan, Germany, and Brazil. So they have formed a unique group, which is called P4 group, and these, they all are united on the question of their admission as permanent members into the Security Council. But on the other hand, we see that there is a very low amount of interest, among the 5 permanent members of the Security Council to induct them into the Security Council. So they don't want to share power. So here comes the issue of undemocratic attitude shown by the Big 5, and they want to continue their hegemonic role in the UN Security Council. But there is also a very good reason for not taking serious initiative to reform the UN Security Council. If Security Council reform, the idea, if it gets implemented, then certainly Security Council may become quite chaotic. So there are very strong reservations about any expansion of Security Council, and we know that there are some regional countries who are opposing the possible membership of some aspirant countries. For example, India's bid to become Security Council membership is strongly opposed by Pakistan. Brazil's bid is opposed by Mexico and Argentina. Germany's bid is opposed by Italy, and finally, Japan's bid is opposed by China and South Korea. So you see that it's not going to be a very easy task. But in the current geopolitical context, we know that the composition of Security Council is highly unfair, because the demand is that in future Security Council has to experience some sort of reform. Otherwise, it may not function the way the international community expects it to function. There was a question about yes, Ambassador Shahidul Haq, has already responded to the question. The possibility of implementing the R2P, in the case of the Rohingya problem. R2P is again, it is the brainchild of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So if any kind of initiative has to be taken, for implementing the R2P principle, in the Rohingya crisis, maybe, it may not be a very effective step, because, that would require the approval of, Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council, and there's the likelihood of China's, using veto power. So again, this issue, the argument, the argument of, using the R2P principle, does not hold much water. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashraf and Atik, I saw one question from Ryan. He has joined us from Nottingham University, UK. Ryan, if you're around, you can ask the question yourself, or if you can read it out, Ashraf and or Atik.
Yes, madam. The question is, did Bangladesh rightly use its long-standing friend India to support the cause of the Rohingya refugee crisis? That's a question for Mr. Ryan. And there's another question from Muhammad Raihan, our undergrad student. And his question is, what are the ways to overcome the challenges in repatriation of Rohingya? These are the two questions regarding the Rohingya issue.
Our colleagues are also
there is a question from the Facebook. Can you read it out?
Yes, please.
Atik, you said that Mansoura has a question from Facebook.
Yes, sir. Yes. Shall I? Yeah. Shall I? Yeah.
Please read
it. Yes, thank you. There is a question in the Facebook. Yeah. So can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can. We can.
Yeah. There is a question in Facebook as Mansoura Emdad. She has a question to Mr. Shohidul Haq, like how can Bangladesh utilize the notion of quiet diplomacy in the United Nations and other relevant institutions for ensuring the safety and security of the Bangladeshi female migrants in the Middle East? It is a long question for you, sir.
There's another question in the I would encourage the speakers, the persons who are asking the questions, if they can speak out, আমি বারবার বলছি তোমরা বাংলা ইংরেজি যে কোনো ভাষায় কথা বলতে পারো, এখানে কোনো অসুবিধা নাই. Our colleagues are also there. Okay, before কেউ বলছে?
আমি রায়ান হোসেন বলছিলাম. Miss, you asked to read the question out.
We read your question out. Ryan, do you have any other question?
No, I think that's the main question that I would like to ask.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, before, I request our panelists or our speakers to respond to the questions. I just have one simple query to Mr. Shahidul Haq. Is there any possibility, because the Security Council, this is also a question to Ehsan, but I mentioned your name because you were there in the United Nations yourself. I mean, we keep on hearing about the Security Council and the R2P, why it is not being implemented. But is there any possibility, because I have heard this discussion taking place among the Indian academicians as well as diplomats, that there is a possibility of out of Security Council action. And this is something they raised with me, that, like even if China comes in with a veto, there is always the possibility of Bangladesh taking it to the UN, and then, Bangladesh has taken it to the UN, but out of Security Council action. And this deters the Security Council members for invoking or casting in their veto. What would be your observation on this? Sorry, I'm coming in with so many questions, but the issues are so close to our hearts. Thank you. Either Ehsan or Mr. Shahidul, whoever would want to respond. Mr. Shahidul.
Professor Ehsan আগে যান
All
আমি তো
right,
কথা
sure,
বলি
sure.
Yeah,
I have very quick observation that, out of Security Council, decision, I couldn't get the question. It means that without having any mandate for the Security Council, some important decisions can be taken against
Yes,
Myanmar.
that is the observation that the Indian Academy as well as diplomats have.
All right. Well, I think, the chance is least likely because, without, having clear, mandate from the Security Council, no substantive step, can be initiated. So the idea is quite, fashionable, quite attractive. The idea is very attractive, but, it is a very innovative idea. But on the other hand, I think that, there are some challenges to get it implemented because after all, the big powers are there, the P5 are, members are there. So they would try to use every opportunity to block any decision which is, reached, outside the Security Council. In this context, let me just, give you, some idea about how vigorously China is trying to, expand its influence in the United Nations. It is already, a very confident power, and just in the last 2-3 years, China, has succeeded in becoming, the heads of 4 UN specialized agencies. For example, ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. The head of ICAO is a Chinese national, and WHO. Yes, yes, that's correct, right? The WHO's, no, not WHO. ICAO, UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Its head is also a Chinese national, and also two other special agencies. That and these are ITU, International Telecommunication Union, and the very important, which is FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. In all these special agencies, you see the Chinese nationals are there. So China is gradually, increasing its influence in the United Nations. So obviously, and China has, some diplomatic clouds with other parts of the world. So China is now, having some sort of understanding with the Russian government. So it's easily understandable that any out of Security Council initiative might not, be successful at least in the near future.
Thank you. Mr. Shahidullah.
Thank you very much. While I agree with Professor Ehsan, but there are also processes which may not be as effective as UN Security Council, but nevertheless has been applied in the case of Syria, and also in the case of Libya, through adoption of General Assembly resolutions, which doesn't have the same kind of a binding or a forceful method, but then it gets UN obligated to address the problem. So that's the other way. Currently, if you talk to the UN colleagues, they will say, "Oh, that's not my mandate. It is the ICJ mandate. It is a High Commissioner for Human Rights mandate. I have only mandate to feed them." So it's kind of avoiding the critical questions. So as I have indicated to you. So once we have a UNGA resolution, currently we have, which is called IIIM, although it focuses on collecting evidence for future cases in the accountability front, but that's a possibility. On the R2P, R2P is gradually gaining traction in the UN system. It was primarily Australia, Sweden, and baby at one stage, and people thought that it will figure out with Gareth Evan, but it hasn't. Very interesting. Day before yesterday, they came out with a atrocity alert, which they come, and this is what they're doing on the Myanmar issue. The first time they have given an atrocity alert on the situation of the United States. It's a very interesting one. All students should read it. It's quite a statement, saying that things that has happened is not congenial to peace and stability within United States, and state has failed to protect minorities and its own citizens. That's the rationale of the doctrine that's evolving. So see, if they can issue that, which has a I'm not saying that it's going to intervene in the United States, but it is giving an alert that if somebody wins and you do not accept it, then you will be violating international norm. That's what it says. So what I'm saying, the safe zone idea that Bangladesh proposed could also be brought into the umbrella of R2P doctrine, because here the state has literally failed to protect and continue to fail to protect its national. It's in the ICC, it's in the ICJ, all over the places. So the only question is that the opposing forces, and I think the Trump administration had done little disservice in this area, because they have lost the moral ground of holding on to the mantle of these kinds of issues. So with the change, and hopefully there'll be a change, at least that's my wishful thinking, things will also get little clearer for Rohingyas, not only in terms of feeding them, but also in terms of their rights. So that's the other avenue which we should continue to pursue. And one thing we have to also understand, yes, China is very powerful. Yes, Russia is very powerful. Yes, India doesn't want to do things the way we want. But once the case of genocide is established by the ICJ, then it will be a different ball game. You cannot seem to be supporting a genocidal government. I'm not talking about Myanmar. I'm talking about the government. Can you continue to support? And then the other sanction has to come into force when ICJ gives the verdict. And I don't think ICJ can stop giving any verdict other than calling it a genocide. So then what do you do? Then where the international, then what will be questioned? The Secretary General is duty bound to convey that verdict to the Security Council and act according to provisions of Genocide Convention. So that's something we need to keep our options open. Sorry for that, but these are all a long shot and a huge diplomatic maneuvering that we have to do with individual countries and also with the UN system. Not that UN system in many occasions is not your friend. On the Ryan India questions, I fully agree with you. We see that India had been on many occasions not been with the Rohingya population. India has a clear policy of giving refuge to these kinds of people. They have done it in the past, including Tibetan. But here we see a departure, and we had a long discussion on that with the Indian government, and we will continue to have that and continue to keep pressure. And they understand that on this, the whole Bangladesh is extremely unhappy the way they at least did, but they try to repair and move to the center from the right lately, but still there's a long way to go, and we'll see how it behaves when it becomes the Security Council member, non-permanent member. On the issue of diplomacy and migrants, I think there Bangladesh has been flying its flag quite high, and it has never been a quiet diplomacy. I have done for 7 years, and also as an independent expert in the Human Migrant Workers Committee, we have been extremely vocal about detention. We have been extremely vocal about the way some of the countries, including in Middle East, they treat the migrant workers, and they are aware of it. But there is no multilateral system to redress it, very limited within the convention, because unless you're a member, we cannot go to get hold of you. But things have also significantly changed over the last 10, 20 years for migrants. Now the countries do take cognizance that if they do things, it will be noticed, and they will be blamed for this. But it's a continuous process of struggle for rights of any community, for that matter, migrant community. I think I have answered all questions. Yes, looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think there are any more questions. Are there, Niloy? I think we have taken 2 rounds of very robust questions, and we have almost come to the tail end of our today's session. Before we conclude and I formally request my colleague, either Niloy or Ashraf or Atik, because we are going through different electricity fluctuations, to give the formal vote of thanks. I would like to conclude the session by saying that let us hope that we'll be able to bring about some changes within the system. And the fact, that voices are coming up, the fact that you mentioned that Atrocity Alert has issued an alert for the US. And let me also mention it for my students and colleagues and the audience who are listening to this program over here today, that US, in fact, was rated as the 10th most dangerous country for women just a couple of years back. Unfortunately, Bangladesh was not in that list. I mean, I'm proud to say that, though India, Pakistan were among the first 10 countries who were in that list. But this I'm saying because the way we are projected and the way, Bangladesh's image comes up in the world arena, I mean, the onus, the responsibility, I mean, of course we'll go for, we are aware of our limitations and we are critical of the state, but that is the responsibility, or that is part of the job of the academy, as Mr. Shahidul Haq also pointed out, that when he was in the chair, he could not say many things, but now I mean, we can see that
I
in
like
him.
that.
Yes, that's what he said. He couldn't say.
Good for him.
In him. And
but sorry to যেহেতু ইমতিয়াজ ভাই একটা কথা বলি, ইমতিয়াজ ভাই, বাট আপনি তো এটা জানেন যে চেয়ারে বসে আমরা অনেক কিছু করেছি একসাথে।
That's
no,
true. That's true.
that is a different side. We are not aware of it. So let us keep it, within the under the carpet for the more point for this point of time. But when we critique, I mean, I hope the Foreign Office would take it with that gesture that it is meant for. I mean, after all, we have come back to this country and we have stayed in this country because we love this country, and there is no way one can deny that. So one has to, I mean, there has to be openness on both sides. But, we opened up this entire discourse on discourses on IR to bring about a kind of a change in the way we interpret and we understand international relations. And that's why, like maybe 10 years or 20 years from now, I mean, one would have different kind of standards for the international organizations, because as Ehsan so eloquently pointed out, that these are standard setting institutions. It binds you to certain normative standards, certain ethical values, and perhaps that is the victory. That is where the civil society, the national civil society also comes in very strongly. That's why in the beginning I pointed out that in the arena or in the realm of human security, UN has fared much better than when it concerns state-centric security. So perhaps one needs to think and rethink on these issues, because after all, when United Nations was set up in 1945, if we read the charter, it was United Nations. I mean, the way nation has been interpreted and reinterpreted, perhaps at that point of time, it was not conceived as so. And it clearly said that we, the people, I mean, it did not say that we, the states. So we would like to go back to that spirit where the voices of the voiceless and we can hear the unheard, and we can bring about a paradigm shift, and the voices from the South can be heard more clearly and loudly. And definitely, the Rohingyas are also speaking out, and Bangladesh's position on the Rohingyas. And we are creating new narratives, not only on the Rohingyas, on human security, on the migrants issue, as Mr. Shahidul Haq himself pointed out, that he himself, how he helped, draft new, bring in new changes. So individual definitely have their roles. And we have, through today's discussion, we saw that how at different levels, individuals can intervene, the civil society can intervene, and the state, of course, is there with its own interests, but we have to work around the state. That is something the students of IIN need to factor in. With these few words, I would like to conclude what I have to say. But before I conclude, I would definitely want to thank the speakers, the participants, my colleagues from the Journal Committee, Ashraf, Niloy, and Atik. But now I formally request Niloy to give the full vote of thanks. Niloy, it's yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I think you have done the great task already of moderating the entire session, and also thanking our speakers and participants. But formally, let me take the opportunity to congratulate two distinguished speakers, and thank you both for presenting both conceptual and from the practical experiences. I'm sure all the participants, our students, colleagues, guest participants from outside the university have been immensely benefited through your scholarly presentation. So I thank Professor Ihsanul Haq and Ambassador Shahidul Haq, our former Foreign Secretary, Senior Secretary, and now Senior Fellow at the North-South University. We are very grateful to you. We thank our departmental colleagues, our colleagues from the University of Dhaka as well, and also from other universities who are present from home and abroad. Special thanks to our students who have been here and also in the social media following our regular programs all the time. We thank you immensely despite the difficult times. You have been patient in attending the lectures, and I'm sure these are very beneficial for you all. Finally, we must thank ourselves. That means the Journal of International Relations Committee with the leadership of Professor Amina Mohsin Madam and also Professor Dr. S.M. Ali Ashraf, my dear colleague, Assistant Professor Mr. Muhammad Atik Rahman, and myself. We have been organizing program throughout the year, and it would not have been possible without your cooperations from the department and beyond. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best. Take care of yourself. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. And these have been uploaded, these in the YouTube as well.
Right. So yeah.
So the two
recorded.
Bye-bye.
We also want to thank the two reporters who have been reporting the program. Thank you so much.
And Sifat. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yes, sir.
দেখা হবে.
Yes,
thank you, sir.
Stay well.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nila, Ashraf.
Hello, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
আমাদের লাইভটা এখন আমরা স্টপ শেয়ার করতে পারি।